Hey, g'day guys, Dougie here again. Welcome back to my little YouTube channel. So I've got a bit of a big one for you today. So I've broken this video down into like sort of 3 parts, I guess. So the first part, we try and sort the fuel regulator in the car that's actually not holding pressure. So look to get that sorted, and then we move on to the float, so the actual float level in the IDA. So I've sort of broken that down into a couple of parts. The first part, I sort of demonstrate how you can set your float while the carb's on a bench, and the sort of process to go through with that. I then move to the car and set the float with the glass ball needle that's in the car, and then following on from that, I demonstrate setting the float that's in the car using the method that I show on the bench earlier in the video, using a traditional Weber needle in seat. So yeah, so hopefully this video helps some of you guys out. I actually found this video the hardest one so far to film. Found it really difficult and really hard to explain, but hopefully I've done an okay job, and yeah, and it helps some of you guys out. So as I said, it is a bit of a long one, so grab a beer, grab a cold one, or even better, grab a cup of tea and some bickies, and just sit down, and if you want to learn how to set your float, this is probably hopefully the video for you. And yeah, and this is just the way I do it. There's probably other ways of doing it, stuff like holding the carb upside down and things like that when we're on the bench and that sort of stuff. But yeah, hopefully it helps some of you guys out there. Really appreciate you guys watching, and man, I really appreciate all the really kind comments and feedback that I've been getting. I never ever imagined that these videos would help so many of you guys so much. So it's just awesome. It keeps me motivated. So cheers, enjoy and take care. Okay, so here's the Holley fuel regulator out of the car. I'm going to replace it with another one that I've got. I've actually got 2, so hopefully one of those other ones is good. I'm going to get rid of all this nonsense here and just tidy it up. We'll just run a smaller fitting and a gauge at the other outlet of the T-junction, and also just see if I've got some bigger inlet and outlet fittings, although this outlet fitting is quite decent. So yeah, let's get the other one and yeah, tidy it up and get it in the car. Okay, so I've got a couple here. Got this one's got some AN fittings on it. I might rob that gauge. The gauge is a nice gauge. And I've got this one here. So this one actually came with the Holley blue pump in a deal with a carb that I bought. Yeah, it came with the Holley blue pump that I put in the car. So it's already got some larger fittings on it, which is good. So we'll just add a gauge there and yeah, just bang it in the car like that, I think, and see how we go. Hopefully it works. We want to be able to set it up for around 3.5 to sort of 4 psi at the carburetor. So we'll use this one, and this is a nice gauge, so I'll just nice looking gauge, better than the other one, a bit easier to read too. So I'll rob the gauge off this as well, and we'll go from there. Alrighty, so I got the replacement fuel regulator all cleaned up, and the gauge popped on it, so just gave it a really good degrease and then a really good flush out, and then just blew it all out with compressed air. So got the gauge mounted off the second outlet as opposed to the other unit, which had the second outlet blocked off, and then the gauge was mounted with this horrible thing in an inline fashion. So I think this is much tidier. Possibly could even be more accurate with the gauge, not too sure about that, but yeah, fingers crossed this does the trick and will hold some fuel pressure for me. Let's give it a go, let's get it back in the car, and yeah, hopefully it works. And of course, don't forget, we've got the added bonus of bigger ID, internal diameter fuel fittings as well, inlet and outlet, so that's always a good thing. Okay, so the replacement regulator's in. Let's flick the switch and sort of just see where it's at. Okay, so the good thing is that it's holding pressure. Okay, so it's sort of stuck there. Doesn't seem to want to drop. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to, that's too much pressure, so I'm just going to, it's probably got a 4.5 to 9 psi spring in it, so I'm just going to put one of the lower psi springs in it and see if that makes a difference. Okay, so okay, so that's our little diaphragm and plunger there. So just looking over the diaphragm, just make sure there's no tears or damage or anything like that. It actually looks really new. Okay, so this is the spring. So that is controlled by this little sort of rod here. Okay, and the more you wind it in, the more pressure goes on the diaphragm, and that sort of winds the pressure up. The more you back it off, the more it relaxes the pressure coming through the rig. So I can tell just by looking at this spring, this is one of the heavier springs. Okay, it's quite heavy, and I believe that's sort of for 4.5 to 9 psi adjustable. So what we'll do is we'll replace it for one of the softer springs, okay, and we'll just pop one of the softer springs for the lower pressure, because ideally I want to run 3.5 psi to the IDA. So we'll just grab one of those springs now, one of the small, softer ones. I'll show you what that looks like. I got the bits hanging up. Okay, got a few bits here, spare new diaphragms and spare new springs. A couple of springs in here. Alright, so here's one of the grey springs, which is the same as the one that came out of the rig, and here's one of the gold springs. So this is a lot softer, and it's actually shorter as well, just easier to compress. So we'll chuck that in and see if it makes a difference to our adjustability. The good thing about this rig is that it's holding pressure, whereas the other rig was just blowing open and the pressure was just rising and rising and rising and rising. It would rise to the point of 14 psi, which is the pressure of the Holly Blue. I believe it's 14. So the spring just sits there like that. It's our new gold spring, and the diaphragm will go that way up, and then that little pin goes into the rig and sort of controls the pressure. Right, so let's just get this back on the unit. Okay, so just change that spring out in the regulator. Let's flick the switch and see what the pressure's doing now. Okay, so that's dropped the pressure right down more into the ballpark of where we want it to be. So it's currently sitting at about 2 psi, and we want about 3.5, so we'll just try and dial that in now. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll start the car up and we'll set the regulator to 3.5 psi while the car's running. Okay, so that fuel rig's all good now. It's holding really steady pressure around 3.5 psi, so aiming for 3.5 to 4 psi. Set it at 3.5, so it seems to be holding there spot on, no issues while the car's running. However, it seems, I don't know if you can see in the video, but it seems the float is currently too high. So while the car's idling, you can see a bit of fuel dripping down the main booster venturi on the right side of the IDA. Okay, so it's also spilling quite a bit when I first started up, so obviously that sort of rush of fuel coming through and hitting that needle is sort of blowing the needle open a bit. It's not blowing it wide open as far as I can tell, but it possibly could, especially because it's a glass ball needle and they're much more sensitive than an ordinary Weber needle. So I need to just back that float off a wee bit and just lower it slightly to stop that overfueling that's happening currently. So what I'll do is I'll rip the float out and I'll show you how I do that. But first of all, I'll just give you all just a bit of a rundown, just adjusting and setting your float on an IDA in general, because it does actually differ a bit when you use a glass ball needle versus like a normal a glass ball seat versus a normal Weber needle in seat. Okay, so the glass balls are, yeah, can be finicky. All right, so I'll just show you that first. Alrighty guys, so just going to talk about how to set the float level, okay, because the car's now got really good steady fuel pressure, 3.5 psi, and but unfortunately the float's a bit too high and there's fuel bleeding through the main booster venturis into the carburetor off the main circuit, which is not what we want. So you can have a look at actually sort of what's happening with that. I don't know if you can see, so might not be able to see here, it's pretty difficult. Hopefully you can, I'll try and get a shot with the camera anyway. But the float fills up here. It also fills up into the wells where the emulsion tubes and main jets go. And there's little holes there which cut across into the auxiliary venturis and down into the car. So that's where the feed for your fuel and air mixture emulsified goes through and into the engine to make the engine go. If this is sitting too high, okay, it means it'll be too high in the emulsion tube wells and will start flowing through, okay, into the actual engine and carburetor, which is not good. So that's currently what it's doing at the moment. It's not too bad at the moment. It's just sort of doing it quite a bit when I first started, and then it's easing off and then just a steady sort of drip at the moment. So the float probably just needs to be backed off a wee bit, not too much. All right, it hasn't fully blown open that I can see, but sometimes when using these glass ball needles, they're really finicky and they blow open really easily and just flood the engine straight away. Even if you think you've got the float set, sometimes these things just suck ass, suck eggs, suck ass, whatever. So just in regards to these glass ball needles, so as far as I'm aware, these originally came about in the VW air-cooled drag racing scene as a needle that's going to let a lot more fuel into the IDA, basically for drag racing. So to set them, they're really on-off, so they have very minimal sort of travel in the glass ball, on, fuel in, off, on, off, on, off. So there's not much sort of travel there, and there's a much smaller window when you set the float tab when it comes to setting these up, as opposed to the traditional needle and seat where there's sort of a lot more travel and a lot more give, okay? If you try and set one of these glass ball, I actually don't expect too many people to have come across these. I'm not even too sure if they're making these 3.2s anymore. I know you can buy a 3.3, but yeah, so most people out there are going to have a traditional, you know, needle and seat like this, okay? When it comes to setting floats, in my sort of experience, especially with a car that I'm going to be drag racing and thrashing, what I sort of aim to do is I aim to have the highest float possible without it upsetting the drivability of the car. So if it was a race car and it's going all out, it probably wouldn't matter so much if the float was dripping slightly into the mains, because it's just going to be full on up in the revs all the time, just sucking fuel, and I'm not trying to drive it nicely around the street. So what I aim to do to have a sort of a streetable car that has as much in the float, I sort of want the float, when I'm setting the float, I want to see it dripping a bit, okay, into the engine through the main circuit, and then I know that it's pretty much at full capacity, and that if I go any higher on the float, it's going to be a disaster and it's going to be undrivable. So what I then work to do is to back the float off ever so slightly until there's no no dripping, and the car's idling off the idle circuit only. That way I know I have a really full float, but it's just within that threshold that it's not going to upset the idle. However, setting the float like that means that when you go for a drive, what can happen is when you brake, when you corner, because that float's so high, it can start to spill into the main circuit, spill out through those Venturis and stumble the car and upset the drivability. Now if you're in a rally car or a race car, that's not a bad thing, okay? That's cool. It means you got heaps of gas there, you're not going to lean out and it's all good. But when you're driving around the streets, that can be a real pain in the butt. So you probably want to back it off just a little bit more if it's doing that, okay? With my 13B PP, if I come down, I've got a steep driveway, as I come down the driveway, without fail, my float spills and the idle gets all messed up and stumbles and just sounds rubbish, okay? And that's just because of the angle of the vehicle, tips the IDA up, and then it starts to spill into that leading Venturi, okay? But when I corner and when I accelerate, when I corner, when I brake normally on the street, it doesn't spill, it's fine. It's, you know, it's completely drivable. So that's sort of where I want it. I want it that if I brake really hard, maybe it will spill. If I go on just idle down a really steep slope on my driveway, maybe it'll spill, but generally the drivability is good. That's why I know that the float is nice and high, but the car is still drivable. Okay. Well, this is a lot of talk. Okay, so because most of you out there will have the traditional style sort of Weber needle seat, I'm just going to show you how to set the float, do the initial setup on the float with one of these, okay? So you can just do it like I just sort of talked about, by sort of setting it at getting it to a point where it's overflowing into the carburetor and it's too sort of rich and there's too much fuel, and then just backing off the little float tab. But in terms of setting up the float initially, this is sort of how it's done, okay? So you get your carb body, okay, and you need a little jig like this, and you can buy these, but it's very easy to make yourself, okay? All it is, it's a small flat piece of aluminium. This one is just a 3mm piece of aluminium, okay, flat, and it's just basically I've used the carb top hat as just a template, okay. Oops, might have to put it the right way. Yeah, just as a template, okay. Just clamp the piece on, drill 9mm drill bit, 6mm drill bit, and just this IDA has still got the little cone funnel in it, so just a drill bit that fits through there, which is good because the little one will just little hole will make it like a good pilot drill bit, and then you can open it up to 9mm. So you just need to make one of those, very easy. And then all you're going to do, okay, this acts like the top hat, okay, with the needle sitting on it. So all it's going to do is sit like that with the needle to support the needle, and then we're just going to adjust the float height using this jig. So when putting your needle on, just make sure you include any sealing washer that you're going to use, okay. Go there, and it's just, I have no idea what this thread is, no idea. If someone knows, tell me. It's some weird thread, but I've just got a nut that's not the right thread, but it's enough that it's going to just hold the needle there and not damage anything. Okay. Just snug it up. Alright, and so you just want the needle nice and flat on the jig, and then it's literally just going to screw down there. Now if you try and set up a glass ball needle like with this method, it won't work. You're just getting up with a float that's way too high. Okay, yeah, so these sort of need the method of being high and just backing it up, or using a little float gauge, which I've actually got one, which is cool. A little VW sort of a clear float gauge which bolts onto here, and you can actually see the level through the gauge. I don't know where it is. I have to find it and show it to you actually. Very handy thing to have if you want, but most people aren't going to have one of those, so yeah. Okay, so that's screwed down now, and the needle is now controlling the float height. Alright, so the idea of setting this is that we want the top part body of the float, not the seam, okay, to be 5.5 to 6 millimeters above the carb body. Okay, so you can buy little gauges that just sit on the top of the body there, and they're like a little rectangle thing, and you adjust the float until it comes up to that point, and you can get like a little spring that sort of goes in there and just holds the float up. I don't have any of that stuff. All I do is I just usually get like a piece of wire like this, put a gentle sort of hook on it, and I just sort of gently just sort of insert it down the side like that, and then just turn it, and that way I can just gently pull the float up and down. Okay, so when I do this, I don't want to be pulling hard on it, I just want to be pulling it gently until it stops. So I don't want to be pulling on it to a point where the stays or the tab flexes or anything like that. It's literally just pulling it up just ever so gently until I feel it stop. Okay, like there. And then we're just going to take a measurement. So you can eyeball it just with a ruler. Okay, and remember we're wanting 5.5, 5.5 to 6 mil. To get that under there. I want to get it so it sort of lifts smoothly. There we go, it's better. Right, so if I eyeball it, and I'm aiming for the highest point of the float that's not the seam. Okay, to me that looks like around 4 millimeters. My eyes are pretty crap, but it's around 4 mil. So I can just check it with a gauge as well, like a cheap one will be fine. Right, see what we'd get. 3.73. 3.99. 3.88, okay. So the general consensus is that it's sort of just under 4 mil. Okay, so just from those measurements there, the general consensus is that the tab is too high, and it'll be shutting off the needle too early, and therefore the float will be too low. So what we need to do, whip the float out, we need to adjust the little tang or the tab down, so that the float comes up more before and lets more fuel in before the needle shuts off. Okay, so we'll just get our little jig off. It's all a bit of a process, but you know, just take your time to do it, and then you won't have any issues going forward, right? Okay, so this is the little tab that we need to adjust. Okay, I can tell by this tab it's pretty beat up. It's actually quite rounded. Looks like it's been mucked around with a lot. Normally in my experience they're more like straight like that, not rounded like this. So what I like to do, but anyway, we'll work with it, and this is sort of just demonstration anyway, but what I like to do is just take a quick measurement. You don't have to do this, but it just helps me to know where I'm at. Just take a quick measurement, sort of see where it's at its sort of highest point, and then when I adjust it, with each adjustment I'll just take a measurement, and then I sort of just can keep an eye on where I'm at and how much it's sort of adjusting things. Okay, so in order to adjust this tab, you can just sort of push on it with your finger. People use needle nose pliers. These sorts of pliers are quite good, okay, because they get on the flat part, and then you can kind of get the middle of the tab with the curved point, okay, and that way you're not applying a sort of a diagonal force, okay, because if I use the needle nose pliers, all the force is going to be applied on the outside of the tab. So some pliers like this are generally pretty good, and we're just gonna set it on the flat bit and just like push it down. Okay, so I've just adjusted it a bit there. Okay, so I've just adjusted it about 1/2 millimeter. Okay, so we'll just pop that in and see what it looks like. Pop that back in and see what it looks like. If you're like, you know, trying to set the float based off the fuel flooding into the carburetor, I actually find it's just good to go in increments of 0.25 of a millimeter or 1/4 of a millimeter until you get that sort of sweet spot, and then you know your float's going to be sort of as high as possible without any, you know, drivability issues. So 0.25 of a millimeter is good, but I think in this case we need to come up a little bit. So need the float to come up a little bit, so I think 1/2 millimeter is good. At least we know if we go too far back, I can now go push it up a bit, maybe 2.5 millimeter or something like that, so find that middle spot, if you get what I mean. Finding this a bit hard to explain. Okay, I'm going to put my jig back on. My brain struggles sometimes. And as always, other people might have different ways of doing things and stuff like that, and but just these are the ways that have worked for me so far. Okay, let's see what that's like. Okay, 5.90. 5.77, 5.92, 5.74. Okay, so I think I'm good with that. Obviously I'm trying to get it at the highest point and trying to sort of hold it steady, but what I can tell from all those measurements is that they're all in the ballpark, so between 5.5 mil and 6 mil. So that is where I'd set it and leave it and bang it in the car. Okay, so that's sort of basically how you set a float on a Weber IDA. I found that really difficult to explain, but hopefully I explained it okay. Alright, and just remember, if you are using a glass ball, which you most likely won't be and probably don't need to be for the street, you know, these don't work this way. Okay, it's definitely different. Alright, cool. So hopefully that helps a little bit with setting up the float. I did find my little float gauge earlier too. So this is a little float gauge, which is really handy. So I'll actually use this when I do it on the actual car to show you sort of where the floats land and stuff. This is again is a VW thing. Okay, it's got a couple of lines there. Generally what we're aiming for is our float level to be sort of in between those top two lines, just in that sort of ballpark area. And what you'll find is if you set your float like I've just shown you here, is that you'll end up there. Okay, but also in my opinion it can't hurt to go higher if you can. Okay, as long as it doesn't affect your drivability. This thing just goes into the little drain plug here. Okay, just sits like that, and yeah, lets you set your float. So very handy for setting glass ball floats, needles. Alright, cheers. Let's actually get around to setting the float on the actual car now. Cheers. So just interesting, you can see straight away the little float tab tang there. It's nice and sort of straight, you know, like that, whereas that other one was really beat up and rounded. So that's sort of how they should look like. Okay, I'll just take this over to the bench and we'll just check that and just adjust it slightly. Okay, so I've just brought the float that's from the IDA on the car over to the bench here, just so I can film it a bit better. So what I'm going to do first is I just want to check, take a measurement, and this is just my personal preference, right? You can just go away and just adjust it, but I like to try and see how much I'm adjusting it. I'm just going to try to take the measurement just to the sort of the point there. Just make sure it's flat on the stays. Okay, about 4.7 mil. Yeah, 4.72. So it's around 4.7 mil, the measurement. So I'm going to adjust it up. So I want to raise the tab so that it shuts the glass ball off earlier to stop that that overflow that we're getting into the booster venturis. Okay, so in order to do that, use some needle nose pliers. Okay. Those are a bit big actually. You want to try and get as even a grip as possible on the tang. The other way to do it is of course just with a screwdriver. So I'll just grab a screw. This might do. Yeah, I'm going to use the screwdriver. Okay, I'm going to try and take it up. If my experience with sort of glass balls is correct, I want to sort of take it up a wee bit. Normally I like to go in increments of 0.25, but it was spilling quite a bit, and it's spilling quite a bit when I first switched the pump on. So I'm going to go up 0.5 mil to start with and see what that's like. Just a little nudge, check where that's landed. Okay, we're about 5.22 there, so that's sort of a 0.5 mil adjustment. Okay, I'm going to pop that in the car and we're going to fire it up and see if we still have any overfueling problems. Okay, so it actually still was blown open a bit and dripping into the carburetor on startup, and then it sort of cleaned itself up a little bit. So I'm going to back it off a bit more. It obviously needs a bit more height on it to shut it off a bit earlier. Yeah. Alrighty, so still overfueling, so I'll just double check where it was at. Yeah, around 5.2. Okay, so I'm just going to raise the tab a little bit more. I might go a little bit more than 0.5 millimeter this time. Okay, that's just over 0.5 mil. I just want to go a little bit more. Okay, we'll give that a go. We've increased it by a wee bit. Alrighty, let's give that a try. Yeah, there's definitely no spilling now. Alrighty, so no more fuel spilling down the boosters. My only sort of concern now would be that maybe I've gone a little bit too much on the tab, but that's where like the little float gauge that goes on the side of the carburetor can come in real handy. So I might just whack that on it and just check, see where it's landed. I feel like it's going to be fine, pretty good, but there's always just a concern, especially with these glass ball needles, because they're just so finicky and so sensitive. You know, it can be a bit of trial error, and that's where one of these little float gauges comes in real handy. So here, so just one of these little V-dub puppies, so we'll just whack that on the side of the carburetor and just see where the float landed, and ideally we want it sort of up around these top two lines, maybe just below, just inside those top two lines. So let's see what it looks like. Okay, let's see what that float level's at on that little gauge. Alrighty, I don't know if you can see that on the camera, but it's pretty much landed spot on, maybe just a little bit on the high side. The little dip in the fuel level is sort of landed just on that top line, maybe just inside it. So that's pretty good as far as I'm concerned, because ideally we're aiming for the highest float possible, without it upsetting you in the drivability. So the trick will be, once we take it for a drive, we already know that it's not spilling at idle, but once we take it for a drive, if it does upset the drivability, then we can back it off a little bit more. So, but otherwise, I think we're pretty much, and that's sort of where it will land by following the method I just showed you on camera with a normal needle valve. So we may even try show you that. So what I might do is I might change this glass ball needle out with that 200 needle that I've got, and I'll just show you the difference that it makes and how that that method doesn't work for glass needles, if that makes sense. But yeah, and then I can reset it back for the glass ball later on. But yeah, just in the interest of trying to help everybody and educate everybody a bit, we might just do that swap out just for the sake of learning. Okay, if that makes sense. And of course what I'll do is I'll just leave that that clear float level gauge on the side there so we can see the difference. Okay, so just removing our glass ball. Okay, so just gonna install our 200 for demonstration purposes, and I've got the little washer on there as well. Okay, so I've just installed the generic standard Weber style needle and seat, and I've also just emptied the float down so that we can see where it lands on that gauge. So where we have set the tab and float for the glass ball needle, it won't be right for this type of needle. It'll be the tab will be too high and the float will be too low. So we should see that as soon as we turn the fuel pump on, the float will land quite a lot lower than where it was set with the glass ball, if that makes sense. Okay, so let's have a look at that. Okay, so you can see there that the float is actually quite a bit lower, okay, than where it landed for the glass ball. Okay, so it's actually sort of sitting at the bottom end of the range, and we actually want it to be up a bit higher. So what we'll do is we'll use our method that we used on the bench there, and actually try and set that and see where that lands the float. Okay, so we'll just need to take out our jets here on just this one side. The seam on this carb seems a bit messier than the other one. Seam on this float. So we're just taking the jets out so that we they don't interfere with the calipers. Okay. We also just want to take our gasket off because we take the measurement without the gasket. Alright, let's try and set this up and film this. Pop the needle in our jig. Alright, let's get our little wire. Okay, I can't even get a measurement from that. It's not even coming above the carb body when I lift it. Hi Rob, where you come to visit? Hello. Good boy. Okay, so you can see that I couldn't even get the float above the carb body. Okay, so that tab is much too high for that particular needle, so I couldn't even take a measurement. So what I need to do is pull the float out, reduce the height of the tab. We're going to have to reduce it quite a bit, and then we'll put it back in and try and take a measurement. Okay, so we've got our float. So we want to push the tab in so it doesn't close the needle off too early. So we'll just check where we're at. I can't remember where we're at. As always, I like to use the calipers to check. .25. Alright. Okay, we're at 5.11 there, so we're at 5.11. We'll give that a go and see how much that changes, see if we get some height above the carb body now. Okay, that's good. The carb float is coming up above the body now, so let's just measure it. Let's see where we're at now. .84. .97. Remember, we're aiming for between 5.5 and 6. Oops. .92. Okay, I think we are. Okay, I think we're bang on the money there. All the measurements are sort of coming in up near 6 mil, so we wanted between 5.5 mil and 6 mil, and we're getting measurements of 5.8, 5.9, 5.7. So happy with it there. I think we're going to be good. Let's pop the top hat back on and let's see where the float lands on that gauge. Okay, I think it should be pretty much spot on up around those two top lines are where we want it, and then we'll check it as well by running the car. See our little float bowl mod there holding some fuel. Okay, I'll just run the float down by starting the car without the fuel pump running, and then we'll put the fuel pump back in and just switch the pump on and just see where the float lands. Alright, the bowl's empty. Let's see where the float lands with our float setting technique that we've just done. Alrighty, very nice. So that's given us a nice high float right up around those top two lines there. So we'll just fire it up and see how we go. Okay, so as you can see by using that technique that we first demonstrated on the bench and then demonstrated in the car, it gave us a really nice high float with the standard sort of Weber style needle and seat. Gave us a really nice high float. There's no bleeding into the main boost, there's no excess fuel going in through the main circuit. The idle's nice and strong, the fuel pressure at the gauge is holding, and that's pretty much how you want it. So obviously there's always the test of taking it for a drive, and if it does spill on corners or hard braking, then you might just want to back it off a bit more. So that's sort of how you set your float on your IDA. Some of you out there might have different ways of doing it. That's how I've sort of always done it. And if you can, get yourself one of those little VW float gauges, because they're just so handy to see where you land. So I'm going to reset this up for the 3.2. Need a glass ball, and yeah, that'll be fine. We'll leave it at that. I have actually ordered some normal, I think I mentioned before, some normal 300 or 3.0 needle and seats. So if the glass ball does prove to be too finicky and stuff like that, then I'll change to one of them. So, and that's all I really need, to be honest. I don't really need a 3.2 glass ball for this. I'm not going to be drag racing this car or anything like that. So yeah, that was a mission. Found it really hard to explain. This is the hardest video that I've made so far, and but I hope it helps some of you out there. So yeah, thanks heaps for watching. I really appreciate it. I'm gonna try to take this thing for a drive soon. Cheers.